We're talking with a critic and author, A.S. Hamrah, who has written this is a collection of his writing, essentially. It's called The Earth Dies Streaming, film writing from 2002 through 2018. It's published by
N+1 Books.
N+1 Books.
That's right. The magazine where I'm the film critic also publishes books.
Are you still with them?
Yes, yeah. I'm in every issue, and I'm online.
Great. It makes sense because they just published this. Excuse me.
The new issue...
Go ahead.
The new issue of N+1 just came out last week.
Oh, okay.
Issue 34.
And how frequently does it come out?
Comes out 3 times a year.
Oh, okay.
But there's new content on the web, throughout the week.
Right. Okay. Very good. And so you've been there with them pretty early on, I guess?
I started writing for them in 2008. And N+1 has only existed since about 2005. My book includes writing from 2002 to 2018.
Got it.
But N+1 began publishing me in 2008.
I understand. So, right. I got you. I loved it. I found your book through a New York Times review, which was very, very favorable.
Oh, yes. There was a very positive review in the Times when it came out.
Yeah.
Last December.
And one thing that grabbed my attention, which is why I made a note to get a copy and to invite you on, was that they pointed out in that review that you, at a certain point, I guess, decided to craft your reviews in such a way that movie distributors couldn't just kind of grab quotes out of that and, exploit your article. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's one of my goals as a film critic, yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of reviewers and critics, however you want to describe them, that might take the opposite tact, right?
I think that there are a lot of people like that, and I don't really understand them. Mm-hmm. And they just want to see their names on movie posters and other kinds of advertising. Yeah,
whereas they become a blatant component of the marketing machine.
Yes.
And they're not making the money that the movie companies or the people in the movie are making. So
No. But so much film criticism today is just publicity.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not really criticism in a sense anymore.
Yeah. I just came from seeing, we're going to get onto your book, just so forgive me, but there's sidebars and things like that happen in this podcast. I just saw a documentary about Pauline Kael. I saw it at the Montclair Film Festival, which is a terrific film festival. And it was a great documentary. And she was maybe the first really well-known critic to say, she really was like, I don't know if there was anybody before who was quite so vocal about how there's such a herd mentality, and that she refused to be part of that herd of critics who did whatever was part of the film that was hot, or films or filmmaker that was kind of hot, and you couldn't criticize that person. Otherwise, you would be cast out of the herd.
Well, Manny Farber was another one like that.
Yes,
he famously wrote a piece called Blame the Audience, which by the end of the piece, he says, we really should be blaming the critics. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is from the early 50s.
So I went from the start because I feel like you are also of that mind. I mean, I don't remember running into you before. I'm sure you've been sitting innocuously at the same press screenings.
You and I met on the set of Dan Solit's last film, 14, which is now playing in Europe.
Oh, we did?
Yes.
It's at Vienna, or where was it?
I know it was in Berlin. I think it's playing somewhere in France now at a festival.
All right. Now I'm beginning to. Do we sit on a couch together?
Yes, in a funeral home.
That's right.
There's a scene in a funeral home that in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn.
Oh my God!
That he shot.
How did you remember that?
I just had a bit part in it. I just had like half a line.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I just ran into Caitlin May Burke in Baltimore. We just ran into each other. I mean, it was during that festival, Maryland Film Festival. I tried to make a recent screening of 14 that they had for friends and family.
Yes, I went to that.
You did go to it?
Yeah, I saw it. It's great.
Oh, I heard.
Caitlin May Burke is my neighbor. She lives on the same street as me.
Is that right?
Yeah.
In Red Hook?
In Carroll Gardens, she is. We're on either sides of the Gowanus. We're on either sides of the BQE.
I got you. Right, right. Wow, that's I guess now I do recall.
Yeah, we spoke briefly.
We did.
Yeah. But I was wearing a suit because it was a funeral home.
Me
scene.
too.
Yeah.
I was as well. Sure, black suit, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's uncanny. Had I remembered that, I obviously would have brought it up sooner. So you had the advantage over me, Mr. Hamrah. Dare say.
Well, anyway, I hope you get to see it soon because it's really a great movie.
She offered me a link.
Well, I hope it comes out.
Edit this out. Oh, I'm sure, and I'm pretty sure there'll be lots of opportunities to see it, and I hope at a big New York area festival in the fall.
Yes.
That would be great. A great break for a very talented storyteller.
Yes, he's a unique and important filmmaker.
I agree. Another person who's not quite necessarily described as being in step with, the sort of what a lot of filmmakers are doing at the moment. Well, he sort of has his own voice that's unique.
He is unique, and he does have his own voice, and he's created his own kind of career.
Yes.
But I don't really know what in step means anymore, because we just live in a world today of pure content glut, where there's an endless supply of movies and television, and it's hard to differentiate between them. Not because they're all the same necessarily, but just because of the sheer number of stuff that's offered now.
How do you choose then what you're going to write about?
Well, my editors at N+1 allow me to write about whatever I want to write about. I don't get assigned the big releases like a lot of critics from magazines and newspapers and journals, other journals, and websites. So I get to choose whatever I want to do. And I do it by the things I'm most interested in, near my deadlines, pretty much. And then, for other places I write, like, Book Forum or The Baffler or, the Harper's, then I am more often assigned things.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. It's probably, N+1 is probably more of an exception.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And that freedom has...
In my life, too, and since I've been writing since the 90s, I never had that kind of freedom before, except for when I was a zine writer in the 1990s. And I wrote for a zine that I was the co-editor of, and other zines, too, where, of course, everyone had total freedom to do whatever they wanted in those things.
Not knowing that you would eventually end up in such one of your main outlets is this very unique spot that does give you a lot of freedom. You wouldn't have known that when you were writing zines back in the day.
No.
But it did it in somehow in that period of time, that experience of writing in those years, in those early years, did that open things up to you? Did that help establish your voice?
Well, it helped me learn to be a writer, certainly. And it was because of the zine that I wrote for that N+1 knew about me in the first place. Then I also wrote for a website that was big in the late 90s in the early 2000s called suck.com.
Oh, I remember them. Yeah.
And they also encourage writers to, speak their minds in novel ways.
Are you familiar with Doug Block?
No.
He's a documentary filmmaker, but he recently reissued, I guess you would say, his second documentary, which came out 20 years ago. It was at Sundance, and then it went on to HBO, but it was about the early internet users. I believe that Suck was in the people that ran that.
The guys that started Suck were in this documentary?
I believe so, if memory serves correctly. Because
they were called Carl Steadman and Joey Anoff.
Okay.
Those guys.
But it sounds like you had some really great opportunities early on to...
Well, I mean, writing for zines and editing them was not, I didn't make any money really doing that. I worked as a movie theater projectionist during all that time at the Brattle Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
I remember it quite well. Going to see a lot of Hitchcock there in the 80s.
Yeah, and in addition to being a projectionist, I was doing freelance writing for magazines and newspapers when I could. It was very hard to break in the 90s. The local media in Boston was controlled by... complacent, I would say, baby boomers for the most part, who weren't interested in people of my generation. Mm-hmm. So I worked as a projectionist, and I worked as a political pollster, and I was a football cinematographer, and I had a lot of other jobs that were not related to writing, but sometimes had some connection to movies or the cinema.
Mm-hmm. When did you move to New York?
I moved to New York in 2002. I got a job as a book editor for a division of Warner Books.
I see.
Which was not really a great job, but it got me out of Boston, which was my goal in life at that time.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in central Connecticut.
Right.
In a town called Durham, Connecticut.
Of course, near Middletown.
Yes, it's next to Middletown, Connecticut, where Wesleyan University is.
Right. I don't remember if we recorded the part where you said, and it's in the forward of the book?
Yes.
Where you described being a young, I guess still a teenager, right? And discovering cinema largely through visits to their campus cinema club or what have you.
As soon as I got my driver's license, I started going to movies at Wesleyan at night because they showed all the films that were for their film classes again at night, and they were open to the public for $1 or $2.
Wow.
So I was able to see many, many, many classic and foreign films before I saw films that were coming out around that time, like Indiana Jones movies, because there was no local movie theater where I lived.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah, there's the nearest Cineplex was in East Hartford, Connecticut.
Right, which
there was one in the Meriden Mall.
Terribly far, but a little far for just a spontaneous night out.
Yeah, it was like a 45-minute drive away.
Yeah, so there was VHS.
There was VHS, but we had no video stores in our town because it was too small.
It's pretty amazing considering you're between Hartford. Not terribly far from...
Right between Hartford and New Haven.
New Haven.
The exact middle. And also between Boston and New York, the exact middle.
That's right. That's right. I think East Hartford might have been the... Because I've done that drive way too many times.
Yeah.
Not recently, but I did it for many, many years. And in the mid-'80s, I lived in Boston, and I would visit the Brattle Theater quite a bit. And I just remember that was that period when they finally were legally allowed to... screen those Hitchcock films.
Oh, yes, when the Paramount Hitchcocks were all re-released.
That's right.
Yeah, that was when I was in high school, I guess.
All right, well, I must have been in grade school then. No, I was very young. I was probably about 18, I guess, when that happened. And I saw those, each one they released like a certain number of weeks apart, and I just went each time.
Yes. I remember that, too, when I was in high school, those coming out, and I saw them all as they were re-released, and I remember
at the Brattle.
No, this is when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw them in Connecticut.
In Connecticut, that makes sense.
At Wesleyan, or there was an art theater up in Hartford, and I was very confused by Vertigo at that time. I didn't really understand Vertigo. It's not really a film for a 16-year-old.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
That brings us up to this being here and this book. I came across a really great review. This collection came out at least 6 months ago, correct? Or 4 or 5 months ago?
It came out in November of 2018.
Okay.
The end of November.
And I contacted you not that long after, but it just took us a while to get here.
Yeah.
But I just came across a review in the Kenyon Review and doing some last-minute research. And wow, that was quite a positive review.
That was a very positive review in the Kenyon Review.
Yeah.
There was a review in Cineast recently that was very positive, too.
Mm-hmm.
And...
You're wise not to mention the others.
No, the others... Have
there been any negative reviews?
Well, in informal places, there have been negative reviews. But all the reviews that have been published have been very positive. So I feel very fortunate. Yeah. The book has done much better than I thought it would.
Well, that's terrific.
Yeah.
I recommend people just check it out. It's called The Earth Dies Streaming, and you have a very unique voice. I really enjoyed reading the book. I mean, certainly, and as you read it, you just sort of it gains a momentum. You can see somebody who's growing as a critic and as a writer.
The book is published in reverse chronological order. The newest pieces are first, and the oldest are last.
That's what I started at the end, and I worked my way backwards. So there you go. Nobody corrects me on my show. But I was also amazed by how many times, like in your book, and it's going to be a little challenging to pull out examples at this stage, but I remember the experience of reading it and realizing, man, do we have a lot of similar or, the same reference points.
Okay.
Cinematically speaking. I just remember it was almost uncanny, I think partly because I had been on a John Ford kick and on an Orson Welles kick and a Peter Bogdanovich, and they were all kind of bundled together because Bogdanovich was part of the Other Side of the Wind team, and his go-to guys were Orson and who was his other, I guess, Hitchcock.
Yeah, or Hawks or Ford.
Hawks. No, I say Hawks is probably a better touchstone, and so I was kind of reading a lot of stuff at that time, just right before I read your book, about these guys, and I was really preoccupied by all of the big story behind The Other Side of the Wind, and almost more than the actual film itself. I was kind of just interested in this old Hollywood and the new Hollywood, and there was very few better examples of these two worlds colliding than in Orson Welles' making that movie.
In The Other Side of the Wind.
Yeah. And that in of itself, as from almost like an academic level, really interested me.
I wrote about The Other Side of the Wind, but after the book was published.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a column on N+1. And I love The Other Side of the Wind. I thought it was the best film of last year, really. I saw it twice in theaters. And I'm it's too bad that most people in the country were only able to see it on television.
It
on
is
Netflix.
too bad. Yeah, it is.
It's a great big screen film, and it makes a lot more sense seen large scale, I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of a double-edged sword in that way, because on one hand, it's sort of buried in Netflix land. On the other hand, they did pay for finishing it, so I mean, it's great what they did. One doesn't want to criticize them for producing that film finally. Yeah,
but they did not do a very good job of releasing it theatrically, which is something they have a problem with at Netflix anyway.
It's true, but you have to also wonder, really, would people have gone to see it?
Yes.
In any kind of substantial... You believe so?
In New York City, certainly.
Okay, in New York City. That's fair. And it was out, but you don't feel like they did a good job at getting that information to enough people.
It's impossible to say what people in other places will go to see. A lot of that has to do with promotion of the films and the way they're advertised and sold and reviewed. Mm-hmm. As you know, if you open a film in 5,000 or now 8,000 theaters, it's the Avengers. Of course, a lot of people will go to it. They all know about it. It's been, there's been a kind of carpet bombing of publicity for something like that.
Sure.
But I think the audience for good cinema exists all over the country in much larger numbers than people are aware. And all the new theaters that have been opening up in New York City, attest to this hunger people have to see films projected, even if they're DCPs.
You're referring to Film Forum opening a new screen, to
Metrograph, the Quad,
the Quad being renovated, opening a new screen, etc. And I know that IFC got the city money, I guess, got pulled, or state money got pulled. They weren't able to. They were going to build an annex.
Yes,
I guess
I
they're
heard
still
that.
waiting on that.
Yeah, I heard they're putting another screen in too.
Okay, yeah.
So as the cinema and television merge and become one thing, that kind of is not that great. I think there's more of a hunger for people to go out to the movies and see things that are good.
Right,
and especially things that aren't part of series necessarily, which is portrayed as the dominant mode of consuming stuff now. Mm-hmm. Binge watching. Mm. But as we see with what's happened with Game of Thrones recently, that maybe is not the best way to make this kind of art form.
Well, why don't you elaborate? Because
I think that serial drama on television fails more often than not because they extend the shows, if they're successful, past the original inspiration of the idea for the series. Mm-hmm. So in Game of Thrones, they extended it past the novels by Martin, and
and they're doing it with the. It's on Hulu, female character.
Oh, The Handmaid's Tale.
Thank you.
Yes.
I don't know. I
Margaret
totally
Atwood.
blanked on it. And it's sort of, this story actually is unfolding in real time in our real world.
And she's written a novel that's a sequel to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the series isn't about that. The series is just continuing because the ratings were high.
Right, which is what they do to all those things. And they get worse and worse the longer they go on.
Oh, absolutely.
And then the original people that started the shows often leave because they're tired and bored with it. And they bring in people who have some kind of understandable track record that people in Hollywood respect, mm-hmm. which doesn't mean that they're, talented or right for the job that they have.
It's interesting how the British sort of figured it out, and they seem to somehow stave off this overwhelming, need for the cash grab. That, I don't know why the British can still do like
limited series.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they're best at and really known for. We don't know what a limited series means.
Well, yeah,
limited
that's true.
Becomes doing a third season of, but for a good reason, because they don't really.
Yeah, they're not. You don't remember.
I don't have the headspace to absorb it all. Not to, and I need whatever is limited for things that matter to me.
Well, binging doesn't necessarily mean that you remember what you've seen either.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, some things are designed for binging, and some things are just put up even though they're not designed for that. I mean, I do have had some nice experiences binge watching some shows, but by and large, what I find is that when you're watching one after another, especially if they're suspense-oriented types of stories, that if they push the possibility of something like this happening becomes more important. That has to be part of how you structure the series. Like, this is possible, this is viable, and when you oftentimes it's just not like this could never happen, and at least with a week in between, you kind of forget.
Yeah.
Enough. So when you pick up the next episode a week later when they put the next episode up, you're kind of willing to forgive some of the craziness of whatever you're watching. I've had that experience a number of times. It's just when you're watching one after another, it's like there's way too much storyline going on here.
Well, they're very plot heavy because
Right.
it's television.
That's right.
Television is all plot,
Yes.
unlike the cinema. But watching Twin Peaks: The Return one episode a week for those, however many
That's a great
weeks it was
example.
on, it was 25 weeks or something, 18 episodes, was great. That was fantastic. I mean, it was really something to look forward to in a kind of a dark time in American history, which was the first months of the Trump administration. And I wrote something about this in the book.
Okay.
There's a piece in there about what I call Trump and Colia in a piece called Heads Without Bodies. I don't know if you read that one.
I read the entire thing.
It's the one where I went to Canada for the for the inauguration of Trump because I didn't want to be in the U.S. And then when I got back, Twin Peaks, I watched Twin Peaks and other things. It only covers the first 7 episodes of Twin Peaks, not the famous 8th episode,
Right.
which is probably the best hour of television I've ever seen.
High praise.
I mean, what was better than that 8th episode of Twin Peaks with the in black and white with the atomic explosions and the bug and all that stuff? I mean, that people argue about whether that's television or movies, or cinema.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is not television, really.
Interesting, right? Yeah. Or the greatest example of the blurring of the lines of the two.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was broadcast on cable television. So people are obsessed with how great television is now.
Right.
And they have to constantly justify that to each other if they're believers in that particular religion.
Right. And also there was this myth back when we were growing up that if you were a TV actor, you were not able to transition into movie acting. Turns out really that was a myth, or at least it was for a certain period of time. That early on, many movie actors went on to TV. Actually, like a lot of the originals. Fred McMurray, who you and I probably knew for well into our childhood, just as a TV actor.
Right.
We didn't know that he was a seminal Hollywood leading man.
Of course, yeah.
It's just one arbitrary example. And then it did work the other way. A lot of TV actors did end up going into the movies.
Like Warren Beatty.
Oh, I don't know what you mean.
Warren Beatty and Tuesday Weld.
Oh, they were on.
They were on Dobie Gillis.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, very good. All right.
Yeah. And but mostly then it was when we were, when one would see reruns of My Three Sons, and Fred McMurray was,
and Uncle Charlie was also another character actor from the movies. So.
And Bub.
Yeah, it's spectacular having when I don't know when your first real immersion into classic Hollywood was, at what age you were.
Well, for me it was television, of course. It was reruns.
Watching the Late Show, or
watching
whatever
the afternoon movie, Saturday morning movie after the cartoons,
right?
Or late shows.
Sure.
On UHF channels or syndicated channels like Channel 11 here in New York, which you could get where I lived in Connecticut, Channel 5. Mm-hmm. They showed all the great Hollywood films, and then they showed then the UHF channels would show a lot of junky, dubbed into English Italian horror movies, and Roger Corman and all sorts of things.
A former guest on my show, I should add. When you were young and you were watching these movies and you started getting that bug, were you interested in particular actors, or were you, or even directors? That seems unlikely for somebody so young.
No, but I was interested in directors from a very young age. Yeah.
Where did this come from? And also, I know there was as you already said, there was quite a desert when it came to cinema in your neighborhood or in your area. But where did your parents still contribute to your
parents were
discovering cinema? Or?
My parents were not particularly interested in the cinema or the movies or anything, whatever they would have called it. But my father was very interested in comedy, so I watched a lot of classic 30s and 1920s silent comedy with him. But a lot of Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields, and he wasn't very discriminating. So, Abbott and Costello, the Bowery Boys, anything really.
Mm-hmm. Highbrow, lowbrow.
Yeah, it didn't make any difference.
To say, I guess Marx Brothers was highbrow is a little funny.
Well,
I guess
compared to
really
Abbott and Costello, they are highbrow.
And they are sophisticated, and they were making fun of the highbrow people, which is the irony there.
So I watched, I was into all that kind of stuff, and just just because of the, and my parents would take me once in a while to see movies, and my mother would explain to me who Hitchcock was or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I mostly gained this interest from watching, non-network television.
Right.
And then reading. And then if something interested me, if I really like Raoul Walsh first. Raoul Walsh was the first director I was really ever interested in.
It's very, very unusual.
Yeah, and it was because of the show. They would show Warner Brothers films, on television back then a lot, and they would just come up randomly, and you would see White Heat, and then you would see Gentleman Jim, and you would see They Drive By Night, and you would see that the same person made them all, and this caused me to become interested in them.
I see.
Plus, I was a big reader as a child, and I would check out books on the history of cinema from the local library. We had a very good library in our town.
Something had to give.
Yeah,
there had to be some culture.
And then before I even had a driver's license or anything, I read the American Cinema by Andrew Sarris, which introduced me to all these directors.
Okay.
At the same time as this was going on, I had teachers in my local public school where I went, in middle school, 7th grade, that would show movies to us like that, and that had a big impact on me. And one in particular was Fahrenheit 451. When I was in the 7th grade, we were shown the Truffaut film.
Was it English language?
It's in English. Yeah, it was made in England.
Right.
With Julie Christie in 2 parts.
Makes sense.
And when we read the book as well, and I just had this kind of epiphany about the cinema from seeing Fahrenheit 451 that had to do with reading the book and seeing the film at the same time. So from that point on, to me, there was I didn't really make a distinction between literature and the cinema. It was all the same thing to me. And, something really great happened to me, which was that Julie Christie read some things that I wrote, and she told a writer who she knows in England, who writes for N+1 sometimes, about how much she liked it. And then she asked him to send me an email telling me that she liked what I had written, because she doesn't do email. And it was a real shocking thing that happened to me, that I got this email essentially from Julie Christie through this other writer she had dictated to him. And then I wrote back to him and had him pass it on to her. And I told her the story after this about how I'd seen Fahrenheit 451 when I was in the 7th grade, and what a profound impact it had on me at the time.
That's a great
story. She wrote me back.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Well, she had an impact on me, too, as a young man, but we don't have to talk about that. It's very different.
Julie Christie is kind of a remarkable actress, not just because of her talent or her beauty, but because...
There's more?
She's one of the rare actors who's never really been in a bad film. I can't really think of a bad film that Julie Christie's been in.
I don't know. Yeah.
Unless you don't like Dr. Zhivago.
I would say that even if you didn't like Dr. Zhivago, you may not push too hard that it's a bad film.
Exactly,
it was an ambitious film, and maybe overly ambitious in some level, and
long.
And long, and the makeup wasn't always great.
What a cast, though.
A lot of what do they put the beards on with? And stuff?
I don't know, some kind of paste. Anyway, but
she's terrific, and I don't recall anything. And if I were to watch Dr. Zhivago, I'd probably be really enjoying it because Julie Christie's in it.
Well, now of course everything gets better with time. So I mean, when I was in high school or college, I just thought Dr. Zhivago was boring.
Torture.
If I saw it now, I would be. What happened? What happened? What happened to the cinema?
Right. So you go to how often are you going to the movies these days? Do you go to press screenings primarily?
No, I
do. You
try to go to. I just went to a couple of festivals where I did events for the book. One in Austria and one in Pennsylvania. They were kind of strange festivals.
I got that in an email.
Yeah. And but I mean, I do go to press screenings, but I try to more often see films with regular audiences. I saw John Wick 3 the other night just at the local movie theater in my neighborhood. I saw The Hustle.
Would that be the Cobble Hill?
That's the Cobble Hill
I'm just trying to figure out which is your neighborhood theater.
That's the closest. It's in the next neighborhood over, but it's the closest one. I saw The Hustle recently with Anne Hathaway in the Monmouth Mall in New Jersey.
Oh, that's interesting.
I was in Asbury Park, and I saw that in the next town over.
They had a recent festival there.
Yes, they did. It was. I didn't go to that
film festival.
So and I saw saw nonfiction the other night at Lincoln Center.
Oh, Assayas?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I mostly just go to regular movies, and fortunately, if I write about them, I'll get reimbursed by the magazine.
Oh, great.
Yeah. If I don't write about it, it's just
$18,
it's on me. Yeah.
whatever it is. I recently purchased a projector.
A 60 millimeter projector?
No. Just a.
Oh, I mean like a digital video projector.
Yeah. Because a lot of what for the podcast, I get a lot of, and also, I'm constantly seeing stuff, and
you can project stuff from your computer on it. Yeah.
Yes, and it is actually really, really great to be able to. All you need is a white wall, and it has to be in the evening.
Yeah,
because too much light will come into the room. And I have Bluetooth speaker, but I also have great headphones, and I actually can really enjoy. Now I still love going to the movies, and there is something to the public's behavior in the movie theater. Doesn't seem to be as there's still some theaters that make a point of really making it difficult for people to do that.
Yeah.
In terms of the pressure, they'll be called out for pulling out their phone during the movie,
or kicked out if they're at the Alamo.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but
which I'm totally in favor of.
Oh,
completely.
Yes, yeah, me too. Remind me if there's time. I want to show you something after this about just that. But anyway,
I have a story about the greatest incident I ever witnessed regarding someone speaking on a phone or using a phone.
Speaking on a phone during the movie.
Yeah, looking at their phone, using their phone during the movie. I've never written about this or put it into anything I've written. But I was at the Film Forum. I was at Film Forum once, and they're doing a retrospective of the films of the Japanese director Mikio Naruse.
Okay.
And there was a matinee, 12 o'clock or so matinee, and I went to see it by myself. It was an excellent film, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was about these two guys who did a horse act. Mm-hmm. That was part of the film.
It's just as well you can't.
It was really great. Okay. But a teacher had brought in a group of students, like 8th graders, to see this film, to introduce them to Japanese cinema, I guess. And they were sitting there and watching this black and white Japanese film from the 1930s. And, after 5 minutes, one of the kids took out his phone and started doing something on it.
Right.
And you could see it in the whole theater. And, a lot of regulars go to the Film Forum, a lot of cinephiles.
Oh, yeah.
That's their life. And a guy sitting behind these students grabbed the phone from the kid and threw it across the theater. And the kid stood up and said, "You can't do that." And the guy said, "I just did do it." And the teacher made all the kids stand up, and they filed out of the theater very quickly.
Wow.
And then the kid had to scramble and go get his phone in front of the screen, and they all left. And I think about that guy often.
He's a hero.
He's
one
of the
heroic
unsung figure. Yeah.
He's unsung.
Yeah.
Well, this episode is dedicated to that man.
Yes.
Film Forum.
Let's
Although
dedicate it to him.
I will say that it wasn't the child's fault. That he should not have been in that theater in the first place, and that the teacher was out of their mind.
Well, but if I were in 8th grade, like I said,
it's a lesson learned. I hope for that young man.
I would have been happy to see that film when I was in 8th grade, just like I was happy to see
freak of nature,
Fahrenheit
Scott.
451. When I was in 8th grade, our Spanish teacher showed us Los Olvidados, the Buñuel film, and that too was a very formative thing for me to see that as an 8th grader.
Again, I think you're an outlier.
Well, I may be,
and always was, always have been.
In any case, I would have been. I would not have caused, I wouldn't have done anything.
You would have known better.
Yeah.
But
even if I didn't like the film as an 8th grader, I wouldn't have done that.
All right. I still blame the teacher in this particular instance.
I blame the kid.
Okay. That's where we part.
That teacher was doing that kid a favor, and he blew it.
Well, I do think it's, ironically, I would probably agree with that. I mean, I think in the long run, maybe that was the better lesson in part of these kids. It certainly wasn't the film. And taking them to the Film Forum, as a ticket, at the ticket booth, I might have said, "Are you sure this is what you want to do for a school trip?"
Take these kids to a Naruse film?
I've done a poor job of bringing up. I feel like we should do another episode about going into all your heroes and all the articles you've written, because I really remember just having so many reactions to it. But just maybe that in of itself should be somewhat of a motivation. Really, people do a Google search and read some of the reviews, because they really do a good job of pointing out why this book is so special, this collection of your writing over the years from 2002 through 2018,
Thank you.
to 2018, your film writing. They aren't just reviews, I should mention. This is far more than that. These are there's some real departures from typical film writing in here, actually, which are some of the most fun. The Earth Dies Streaming, and it is written by A.S. Hamrah, and M+1 is the publisher. Easy to find and purchase. So anyway,
You can find it in stores and on Amazon, but it's best to purchase it directly from N+1
okay.
at n+1mag.com.
Let me say that.
Yes,
And
then we make the
everybody
most money if you buy it directly from them
makes
rather than
sense.
Amazon.
Right. So,
but bookstores,
Exactly, yeah.
it's in bookstores too. It's
Right.
not that hard to find.
understood. n+1mag.com is
Yes,
the website.
spelled out,
though.
yeah.
Plus, the word plus?
No, it's N+PLUSONEMAG.
Okay, very good.
.com.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for having me.